Welcome to Lunch Money. We are your online and social media home for workouts, special situations, and capital raising professionals. My name is Nick Samios. I'm the director and fund manager here at Hermes Capital, and I am your Lunch Money host. So a very special welcome to you. It's a big day for us today. It's episode 50. Can you believe it? 50. So we have missed a few. You know, we took a bit of a break over Christmas and a bit over Easter, but we started when COVID started, and so we're very grateful that enough people have been interested to keep us going and to hit episode 50. Now, I would like to say that the last couple of weeks we've had a couple of technical issues with audio and with sound, but I really want to encourage you to go back and have a listen. Have a listen. Go to the podcast, go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google, whatever it is you like, and have a listen to last week, because the content on the property market, the commercial property market, was really good. So I wouldn't want you to miss out on that just because we had a few issues with the video. And likewise, I'd also encourage you to go back the week before when we spoke to the guys about equipment around the world, around Australia. And I really would encourage you to have a look at that as well. And thank you very much to Deanne Tyndale, who's congratulated us on 50 episodes. Thank you very much, Deanne. Very kind of you to give us those 4 hand claps there. Now, I would encourage you to please like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell wherever you're watching us, whether it's on YouTube or on Facebook, or if you're listening to us on our podcasts, then share it with your other professionals. I was looking at someone's PD points the other day, and they must have had about 47 episodes of Lunch Money where they've been listening in and accumulating PD points. So you know, it's not just the great content. You're also learning while you watch. Tony Sykes, thank you very much from our insurance brokers there, GB Insurance Brokers. Thanks very much, Tony, for your congratulations. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Today we are going to have a look at the small business restructuring. Is it working? The stats are really low at the moment, and you've got to ask yourself, is it working, or maybe the environment's not right? And I thought at the same time it'd be good to ask the question as to whether or not is Safe Harbour working. I mean, small business restructuring's only been going obviously since the beginning of the year, but Safe Harbour has been going for a little bit longer. And just for those of us not necessarily totally immersed in restructuring or insolvency, the idea of the government brought in these new small business restructuring regime at the beginning of the year on the basis that insolvency practitioners were going to be run off their feet, and there was going to be a lot of small businesses that needed rescuing when JobKeeper came off. But as you'll see shortly, I'm not sure that those stats are all coming in as we had expected. So I'm going to introduce our first guest, Kathy Sozou, but because I'm just basking in these here, Paul Aparthy, thank you very much, Paul, for your comments there as well. Paul, at one stage, actually held the record for the most views of a guest when we investigated Chapter 11. So thank you very much, Paul. All right, now I'm going to introduce our first guest, and our first guest is Kathy Sozou. And Kathy is a partner at McGrathNicol. And I will say, you know, even after episode 50, I've got 2 brand new guests. And Kathy is partner of McGrathNicol in Sydney. Kathy, tell us what's been keeping you busy this week.
Thanks, Nick, and hi all. Thanks for having me. Look, we're actually quite busy at McGrathNicol, which is interesting and probably flying a little contra to the rest of our the restructuring industry. But what's interesting is I would say 90% of the work that we're undertaking is not really in a level of distress because of COVID-related issues. So we're doing a bit in the property industry. We had a big appointment earlier in the year to Dildum, a big property developer with a significant development out in Western Sydney. There was finished buildings, land banks, and anywhere in between the two. And we've had a few more appointments this week off the back of that from different lenders who are sort of, I think, managing their exposures to the group more broadly. I've been busy on more of a distressed piece, but more advisory in terms of the confidential capital constrained entity stakeholders considering whether they should invest more or not and what the business case is. again, completely unrelated to COVID, and there are other pressures hitting that business. So I think we're keeping ourselves busy, but if I were to say it's in any way, shape or form a little drip of the tsunami that's coming, not yet. I haven't seen it yet.
Interesting. So you mentioned Dildam. Now, anyone who's from Sydney would be well familiar with Dildam. They advertise a lot on the radio. They're big apartment builders. Now, I would imagine that would be quite a complex structure. It's not just one single Dildam Pty Limited. They've probably got SPVs all over the place. That's
right. I'm not directly. I've been appointed this week to a smaller exposure in relation to the Dildam Group, but the bigger one that came in earlier in the year, I'm not directly involved in, but it is large, it is complex, as you would expect of a large development group. As I said, they've got a range of assets in different stages of completion, so it comes with sort of a different strategy for each asset as to what's the best way forward, and those that are partially complete, what's the assessment and the feasibility, do we build through or not? So it is interesting, and perhaps there's a COVID element around the commercial understanding of what that feasibility looks like in Western Sydney and apartment prices. But it's nothing that's directly related to say, well, COVID's the reason this went in.
Yeah, when we looked at property last week, we looked at, Melbourne apartment prices, for example, are off 30 or 40%. I'm not sure how that reflects in Sydney. Now, the other thing that you mentioned, you said that you were talking about people investing more, or sort of what go stop, or sort of decisions. Are they private equity firms or investors? What's the go there?
Shareholders. No, not private equity, so nothing institutional, just shareholders in. This one's a bit sensitive, so hard to talk about, but really just a capital constrained entity, and it's do we invest and go forward, or do we cut our losses now? But there are some consequences to that. So, it's just that element of the distress side of what we do. If it's not the formal appointment piece where you can talk to receiverships and liquidations and VAs, there's that whole world in between where it's just putting that distressed lens on an investment decision.
And is there any safe harbour involved in that, or no? So that's just like, it's just a cold hard look at the numbers and how does everybody come off best by charging it the enemy or just calling it a day, basically. Yeah,
this one particular is in a regulated industry, and so it's more meeting regulatory standards rather than pure solvency standards. So safe harbour hasn't come into play yet. It's more the regulator.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So bottom line, not necessarily seeing much by way of COVID as such, but there's still stuff bubbling along. All right. Yeah. Look, we're going to put you back in the waiting room, Kathy, and we'll just introduce our next guest, who is Michael Sloan from Ashurst. G'day, Michael. How are you?
I'm well, Nick, and you?
Very good. You're looking fantastic there, which is great. We had a couple of false starts. Very good, very good. So Michael is a partner at Ashurst in Melbourne, and tell me, what's been keeping you busy this week, Michael?
A lot. It's pretty disturbing when you're on work calls at 10 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday nights. Like Kathy, it's not COVID related. The new work that's come in has been agri and regulatory in nature.
Right. So, and they're sort of legacy issues, or are they international? I mean, if you're on the phone at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, is that someone with a bit of a timing difference?
Yes. That was a major international financial services regulatory issue. The other one was just a trial running with just an enormous amount of work.
Yeah. And speaking to insolvency lawyers around town, I guess they seem to be busy with legacy litigation as opposed to anything particularly new. Is that and why is that? Is that just because that's the normal course of business, or is it just that people are, maybe insolvency people, for example, are just picking up files for want of activity and chasing down to see what they can get?
I think it's just a lack of, general activity. Everybody on the call knows, like we've got historically low distress, we've got historically low interest rates, unemployment's low. The huge amount of stimulus has worked a treat, and with the other levers that the government, pulled and pushed last year were almost in a boom rather than the anticipated tsunami that Kathy spoke of.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting when you sort of read the papers. There certainly doesn't seem to be any inflation, even though used car prices are going through the roof, property prices are going through the roof, and furniture and clothing's coming off apparently. But the people are more concerned about a deflationary event. So I guess at a firm such as yours, I mean, are you resourcing up, or are you anticipating an uptick in work, or just play it how it comes?
I think play it how it comes. Firms of our size, like the big four accounting firms, there is that degree of flex within the firm, so that it's not the same as if you're in a smaller sort of standalone practice. So.
All right. Well, look, let's bring Kathy back, and let's start off with something that sort of triggered this discussion for me. Was I saw on LinkedIn that McGrathNicol had put together, and Creditor Watch had put together, a white paper called "The Future of Insolvencies: Tsunami, Torrent, or Trickle," and I'll put a link to that white paper in the notes for this episode. But tell me, Kathy, I mean, what were the sort of the major takeouts from that paper?
I think if we had to call it in one, it would probably be trickle.
Right.
At the beginning of COVID, probably this time last year, actually, everyone was expecting the tsunami because we'd hit COVID. We didn't have any of the relief measures in place. It wasn't really clear what the government response was going to be. You had people concerned about their exposures. You had smaller retailers, for example, with landlords beating down their door and their customers' base is switched off. And we're thinking, well, how does that play out? Everything then stabilised with all the relief measures that were implemented. You had the safe harbour relief. You've got landlord relief, you've got an economic and political response that says hold fire, we're doing okay. And that worked, rightly so. We actually had high consumer confidence, and we did sort of successfully, I think, stop the flow that would have otherwise transpired. We then came into this year, with the safe harbour relief. I think safe harbour can be valuable at the big end of town. And when I say the big end of town, it's when you have a board of directors in professional capacity. They're paid. There's an understanding of their duties as a director. They're more cognizant. They're more willing to pay for appropriate advice to manage that exposure. At the small to mid end of town, I might be a cynic, but I think your exposure to an insolvent trading claims, item 19 on your concern list. You have got personal guarantees. Your house is aligned. You've got suppliers and employees beating down your door. No one's really thinking about, well, am I technically insolvent? And 6 months later, is a liquidator going to come and look at my insolvent trading exposure? So I don't know.
At the SME level.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I don't know that safe harbour, I don't know that the end of safe harbour, that the relief, the temporary relief, I didn't think that was ever going to be a real trigger. I thought it was going to come with the end of JobKeeper, because I think at the small to mid end of town, it's really, do you have the cash to make the payment you need to make or not? And I think the delay that we're experiencing may actually be because some entities or businesses are probably more liquid now than they have ever been. They may have debts building up. They may not be the most financially secure, but if you think about, from a lot of businesses, the two biggest cost-based items are your staff and your premises. And if you've not paid those for upwards of 6 months, whatever cash you've received from your customers, that's cash. Like, you're holding that. So I think there's a liquidity piece that needs to play out, which is maybe what's the delay we're seeing now between end of JobKeeper and when the pressure really hits.
Jill Lawrence here one of our regular viewers is making the coffee exactly. So, a comment, I should say. I'm just drinking my coffee. Exactly. Safe Harbour appears to work for directors that are not personally exposed. Even so, is it used that often? So, I will put that question. Thank you very much for your question, Jill. I will put that question to you, Michael. Just before I do. I mean, the idea of Safe Harbour, it was brought in around Malcolm Turnbull's time. It was all part of a sort of a new innovation package. I think the idea was that, people that knew what they were doing could get involved with, startups and innovative companies and not necessarily risk all their personal fortune just for wanting to put their shoulder to the wheel. And that's why, as Kathy says, there's this big NED thing. Now, I think, Michael, were you saying to me the other day, I mean, you've been involved from Safe Harbour from a very early stage. I mean, you were working this early on?
Yes. Yeah. I think we might have done one of the very first ever Safe Harbour engagements. But look, I think what Kathy has said is very insightful. I think the other thing which kind of cruels Safe Harbour, and I think it plays into the small business restructuring as well, is the requirement to have the employee entitlements up to date, because often it's not being able to pay those which actually triggers a default in SME land. So that's why I think that Safe Harbour has a role to play at the larger end of town. I don't also, picking up on that innovation agenda, startups don't really face that same insolvent trading risk that more established companies do, because they generally just, they run on cash, and then if they run out of cash, well, then they stop. So it's not like your typical build up in the liabilities. I think Safe Harbour has been good, but it's got, it's had a fairly narrow window of utility, more aimed, as has been said and commented, at the larger end of town.
But I guess one of the points of it, I mean, I had coffee with you earlier this week, Michael, and
yes,
you were talking about a local business that you'd given just a little bit of sort of advice on the side to.
Yep.
I mean, let's imagine, they've said, Michael, you've got lots of years experience in these, in business generally, and lots of people. Would you please join our board? And, Safe Harbour would protect you. On one hand, you've got good intentions. You want to help the business. But on the other hand, you don't want to have to go home at night and explain to your loved ones why they've lost their house, just because you wanted to be a good bloke. So I basically got that right, don't I?
Yeah, you've got that right. Okay. My Kathy knows my wife Julie. She often says to me, "Why do you help out so many people?" I'm a sucker. But no, that was the gym that I go to was a really small business, but it used that time to restructure itself, and it innovated, and to use Kathy's word, it pivoted, it moved and managed itself through. So a lot of businesses, like good businesses, used COVID to restructure themselves. But I was speaking to the head of the Glenferrie Road shopping strip this morning, and she was saying, in terms of those local retailers, that they're generally, like the good have done really well and have restructured. The bad are sitting there thinking, oh my God, JobKeeper's come to an end and the landlord wants me to start paying rent, and I haven't changed. And that's why I think that Kathy's liquidity point, I thought really resonated with me, because it is those small businesses that will be facing an impact, but probably in a few months. And
All right. Well, I just want to get to a couple of stats, and then I'm going to come to you, Mark Robinson, and to you, Shabnam. We're going to buy into your little discussion there very shortly. Firstly, I would like to go to stats. So let's start with slide 4. And let's see exactly how SBR is going. So I had a look at ASIC. These are stats compiled by myself. I'm not a statistician, but I went to the ASIC website, and there's been 38 declarations for eligibility of temporary restructuring relief. There's been 6 notice of appointment of restructuring practitioner for a company, and there's been 3 actual plans. So that's a total of 51. But given that some of these people are doubling up, there's actually been 40 companies that have availed themselves of that. And if we can just go for the history books, let's have a look at the podium on slide 3. And Adam Prono, I don't know Adam, he's in Sydney. Ross McDermott, I don't know either. He's out at Melbourne, so he did the second one of these plans. Now I do know Darren Vardy. He's come in 3rd there with one on the 19th of April. And Darren, we're going to have to wait for you next time. You have to lift your game next time the legislation changes to bring something in. So let's now the next slide I would like to go to is just very quickly is my diagram on slide 5, and this is my little picture of what's going on. So we've got a small business. They've got to get through some criteria. They may or may not have to deal with their bank. They might have lawyers advising them. They've got their accountants. That's my impression of a calculator there, in case you're wondering. They've got suppliers and employees. Now, one of the big issues, we'll just ditch that slide for now. One of the big questions that I have, and let's just go, we'll go to Mark Robinson, who's been a guest. He says, doesn't the SBR cap need to increase to at least 5 million to be workable? Now, before we come to that, we'll go to see what Shabnam had to say. Shabnam Amabiaji says, isn't a debt level of 5 million better placed into a traditional voluntary administration? Whilst 1 million may be low, there would be too many complexities to warrant a small business restructuring and the lower fees at a debt level of 5 million. And then we've had someone else buy into this as well. Alice Rue, I don't know Alice. I don't know if any of you know Alice, but she says, I tend to agree. I thought the 1 million in unsecured debt only about right in terms of where the SBR should be aimed at. So thank you very much to Mark, Alice, and Shabnam for sharing your thoughts there. Now, another comment that I don't have is a comment that someone made when we posted the promotion for this, and he said, "Oh, the fees are too expensive." Now, of course, the whole SBR thing is meant to reduce the fee. So let's start with you, Kathy. Where are you on the limit? Should we lift the limit to 5 million?
I'm probably with all 3 of the comments. Do I think it's effective at 1 mil? Probably not, because I think it's a good intention. Let me start at the beginning and say I think that it is well intentioned to have a smaller process and a streamlined processes to help businesses of this size try and restructure themselves. So that's helpful, because VA can be an expensive process. It can be complex. And if you're a business with sort of sub-1 million debt, maybe it doesn't quite work for you. So I think there's valid intention. Do I think that the current process as drafted achieves that? Probably not, which is why I think we haven't seen big numbers. And I think it's a range of reasons. I think the limit's one part of it. But I also think the process doesn't quite hang in my head. It's been referred to as a debtor in possession model, in that the debtor stays in control of the business effectively. So you're coming in as a small business restructuring practitioner. You don't really have access to challenge or interrogate. You know, they give you books and records, you look at them. Being asked to certify a plan, but you may not have the appropriate information or control to actually form a view on that. You're not really having to compare it to an alternative, because there's no need to do a liquidation counterfactual. So I'm not quite sure what you're certifying, other than mathematically it adds up and you're sending it out to creditors. As to Shabnam's point, as you get up, as you lift it to 5 mil, they become quite complex, even though the debt might be small. Often at the smaller end, the actual structures that are in place and the issues that come to play and related party involvement, that's quite complex at that part, at the smaller end of town. So again, I don't know that this system works, where you're being asked to come in and solve the problem and you've got some liability as a practitioner, but you've got no control. And meanwhile, I'm still not sure how the business trades through when they're effectively flagging at the beginning of this process to all their creditors, sorry, we might be insolvent. So if you can just help us out here and take a haircut. Oh, but can you keep trading with us? Because we'd really like to trade through this period. Because if I'm the creditor or supplier, even with the best intentions in the world, if I say, look, I might take a haircut on my debt, I want COD on anything between us whilst you affect this plan. So it squeezes you anyway.
Yeah. I mean, now, Michael, what are your thoughts there? Firstly, I understand that you may have been somewhere hovering around at the conception of this model, although it may or may not have turned into Frankenstein's monster once it got into government hands. And I know, talking to you the other day, you thought that the cap was one issue, but employee entitlements as a qualifier is another. So, I mean, firstly, any reflections on Kathy's comments, and do you want to sort of talk to us about employee entitlements?
Yeah. Look, the $1 million cap is, I think, intended to be given some time to see how it works. And I think that time should play out. Yes, and it was good to see Paula Parthy there as well. Paul and I and Richard Fisher and others were speaking to Treasury almost around about this time a year ago, trying to triage, and we basically suggested that there should be the reform should be aimed at the smaller end of town to enable debt restructuring effectively. What came out, what we put forward was relatively straightforward. What came out is quite complicated, but I think that it should be given a go. I think that there are issues, the general populace doesn't really know about it, so that, there's a bit of education. The point about employee entitlements is a much larger issue, but, and this is a personal view, I think that the primacy given to entitlements, potentially over jobs, pervades not just this, but voluntary administration as well, and impacts on safe harbour. But to get, unfortunately, any serious consideration of that is just not going to fly politically. But from a law reform restructuring perspective, looking internationally, I wonder whether enabling people to compromise entitlements to save jobs may assist in restructuring across the board. But that's a big topic, and it's undoubtedly controversial. But to go to the point, I think give it another few months before we look at the cap on the 1 million. And the theory behind it was about 78% of businesses that go into some form of insolvency process have debts of less than $1 million. That was the reason why they chose that cap. But it should be reviewed in due course.
Okay. Now, and you were sort of when we were talking, we've had some more great comments. So thank you very much also to Natasha, who said great points, Kathy. So thank you very much for those comments. When I saw you the other day, Michael, you were kind of quite strong on, look, we've got to give this thing some time. As we've been discussing, I mean, typically when it comes to small business or any kind of insolvency, there needs to be triggers. Certainly the banks are sitting on their hands. The banks aren't pushing anybody. We've had JobKeeper, as we know. And look, credit to JobKeeper. If we just have a look at slide number 1, there was a great little article by Robert Godliebson in The Australian, and he gave a case study about how one business was, would have gone to the wall. Thanks a lot for that. We'll take that slide down. Would have gone to the wall had it not been for JobKeeper, but that's come to an end. But the other thing is, then there's the ATO. Now, I've heard, rumour on the street that starting May, which means starting next week, that the ATO is going to start issuing 100 wind-up notices a week, and then starting June, that's going to be 150 a week. Now, we won't know if that's just scuttlebutt or true, I suppose. Come this time next week, we'll be able to check the notices and we'll know. But I guess, Kathy, do you think it's too soon to call it?
I think it is, but I do think the ATO has a major role to play in how, especially at this end of the market, the level of activity that we see. So to the extent that the ATO has been sort of falling into line, if I can use that terminology, with the rest of the economic and political interest around let's give everyone some time, and I think they've played their role in doing that. But at some point, we need to start reverting back to what is an economic market, an efficient market, that says, well, for those that aren't cutting it, they need to fail or go through some level of process so the contagion doesn't start spreading. And we've heard about the zombie companies and the impact. I'm not being too sensationalist, but to the extent that businesses are continuing to incur debts where they may never be able to pay them, there is the risk of a contagion effect. And, I think that's why it's now incumbent on entities in the current environment to look up and downstream. So whilst you may be okay, if you are reliant on a key supplier, it's probably worth having a look about how they're going. Equally, if you're reliant on a key customer, it's worth looking at how they're doing, because it might squeeze you from either side, even if you've managed your own affairs properly.
Well, I'll just quickly come to Paula Parthy. Thank you very much for your comment. Good points, Michael. Small business restructuring law reform is hard. There are now a lot of good models overseas that we can learn from. And if you go back and listen to the episode where we had Paul, we talked about some of those. I agree, though, that we should be giving the new regime more of a chance to see what does and doesn't work before we start tinkering. Well, I think that's probably a very fair comment. So just a couple of things that you said, Kathy. Firstly, yes, companies failing. It is, it is the law of the jungle. The resources get, those companies are holding up employees, staff, talent, and resources that by the law of the jungle should be reallocated to places that can use those resources more efficiently. So there's that. And when we had Warren Hogan, the economist from Judo Bank, on earlier this year, we talked about that. The other thing, of course, is I guess the sort of moral hazard type issue where, I'm running my business, I'm paying my tax, I'm paying everybody. But meanwhile, my competitor next door isn't doing any of those things. And I've got to, I'm losing sales, I'm losing, I'm not able to hire more people. So there's all of that as well that certainly comes into that. Okay, now I'm just having a look here, maybe some of the reasons why. So one of the reasons that maybe the SBR is not being taken up is it could be that we just haven't had the pressure yet. So there is that. But then we've got, it could be the $1 million cap. It could be the employee entitlements. There is also a lot of money. We keep saying this on this show. There's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of easy credit. House prices are up as well, as we know, around the country. So it's easy to borrow. So I just wondered, Jill Lawrence made another interesting little observation here. I need to put my glasses on to make sure that I pick the right one. So she says, this sort of illustrates it, do you consider there is a risk for small businesses now booming unexpectedly, say a local gym, I guess that's one example, to overcapitalize, perhaps not allowing for a return to employees, etc. So my question is, I'll start with you, Kathy, then I'll come to you, Michael. Are you seeing easy credit and high asset prices as an impediment to restructuring?
It's probably not an impediment to restructuring. I think it's helpful in appropriate restructuring. And that's why I think there's actually now is a good time for businesses to take advantage of what is, I think, outstanding circumstances to effectively restructure your business. You have stakeholders that are trying to work with you rather than against you. You have a market where there's a surplus of liquidity and people are trying to find a good place to put it. You do have availability of capital and low interest rates. This is an outstanding time to restructure your business appropriately. I say appropriately because I think the point is go through a proper avenue and use the resources that are available so you actually execute it in a way that is sustainable. My concern is to the point really that was just made is I don't think businesses are necessarily, I think there's a risk, maybe if I put it this way, businesses are bridging to something. I don't think they've articulated what it is they're bridging to. So there's cheap cap. There's an issue in my business. I need money. Look, I can redraw on my house or I can access money quite simply. I'm going to pull that in. That buys me time. But I don't think people are articulating what it is they're bridging to or understanding where they're going. And that's the risk. Whereas in a proper restructure, you're forced to think about whether it's a VA going through a docker, what's my end game? And it forces you to think that way.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think, Michael? I mean, you know, a lot of capital, a lot of alternatives to restructuring. On the other hand, there does seem to be this fantastic window, as Kathy says. I think it's a great window for floating a business, selling a business. I mean, the window's open now for lots of stuff. What do you think, Michael?
I agree.
Do you do a bit of M&A advisory in your practice as well?
We do. Paul and Kathy were involved in it. You know, we just finished advising Toll on the deal with Allegro. So no, look, I think you know, it's a very opportune time, as Kathy said. 100%.
Some of these front page restructurings are certainly a great advertisement for the TMA. You've got Adrian Loader, obviously, who's got a deep history with the TMA and yourselves as well. And then you look at the Virgin matter, there was TMA fingerprints all over it. So yeah, the TMA
good and bad fingerprints.
Look, you know, no such thing as bad publicity, as they say. No, it has been outstanding for the TMA. There's no doubt about it. Now, some of the other issues that I've just got noted down here. I mean, I've spoken to some practitioners who just don't like SBR. They say, well, why would I do that? I should, you know, I'm better off just doing a voluntary administration. So what do you think about that, Michael? I mean, do you think the way the thing is, you know, as you said, it was conceived in a simple design. It's become Frankenstein's monster. They're my words. I don't want to get you in trouble. But, you know, should you just opt for the voluntary administration and forget about it?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I do think it's got it's got a valuable place. But like any type of reform, and it was, look, I think when you looked at it, it did make sense to have something available that was not as bloated as VA. My view is that VA itself has become expensive and has gone beyond what was supposed to be quick and easy breathing space. But, you know, give it a while, give it a few months, give it a year, and see what it's like. And then if it's not working, then change it.
Yeah. What do you think, Kathy? I mean, is it, you know, are you sort of more inclined to say, look, why don't we just use the voluntary administration process? It's been tried and tested.
Two answers. As an insolvency practitioner, am I lining up to take on an appointment like this? Not just yet, because the risk profile sits a little uneasy.
Yeah.
But do I think, to my mind, it's not so much a matter of time, but I think it's when the pressure hits. When we genuinely see the pressure starting to hit, is there enough of an uptake of this as a process to say, well, on balance, we think people are using it? And do we have enough evidence and examples to then identify how best to fix it? Because I think until we have some scale through the process, you know, I think, did you say there were 3 restructuring plans in place? We're yet to see if they actually make it through to a successful outcome, or whether they've just been agreed on and yet haven't been executed. I think we need to see how we need to get the numbers up to then challenge and improve it as a process before I think we throw it away.
Yeah, I guess as you say, we you know, it's way too soon to know whether or not it's been successful. But I do know that, again, some practitioners that I've spoken to, they've said that because I'm not a practitioner myself, I don't see the information, but, you know, the practice notes or whatever it is you call them that come from the professional bodies have not been clear, perhaps, or that they're just not user-friendly?
I think there's a lot of, I think with any new legislation that's introduced in a very, very tight time frame, you're always going to have teething issues. So it's a bit unclear. There are some things that are open to interpretation. Maybe the drafting on a technical reading is open to one view, but in practice it was meant to achieve another. Are you taking a strict liability view and trying to cover yourself, or are you being a bit more commercial? But, you know, are you concerned that you don't want to be the test case that proves actually you interpreted it the wrong way and we actually meant this? So I think there is some confusion on both sides around some of these principles. And that's why I think you need the test cases to flow through so that we can start to refine them and get clarity on the way it's supposed to go. I mean, my understanding of the process is you're not supposed to go anywhere near a courtroom. It's supposed to play out easily and quickly and be agreed amongst the parties. Whether that is actually achieved is yet to be seen. And I think we need to see whether these plans are executed on and actually get to the point where they're implemented and successfully see people come out the other end before we can call whether it's successful or not.
Well, I was saying to you earlier that there was a comment put on LinkedIn saying that the process was too expensive, but I think the whole point of the SBR is that it's got to be cheaper. But I'm wondering, as a result, I mean, probably nobody really wants to talk about this, and me being just a poor dumb financier, I might blurt it out. But isn't it if it is just so cheap, it's just not that attractive for practitioners to even want to do it? They're just not making enough money out of it?
There's two components. So there's the upfront fee, I think, for that initial process of where you're agreeing the plan, and that will just come out as a commercial. I think, you know, we'll see where the forces land. If someone thinks it's worth 10 but someone's willing to do it for 5, then it's 5, right? And you see how that plays out, and you have to form a view about whether you want to expose yourself in that market. But from my understanding, when you're implementing the plan, your remuneration's pegged to actually the payment of the dividend. And so if there's a plan that goes up, but you're there working with people over an extended period and that plan never gets through to fruition or for whatever reason fails, you're exposing yourself to no payment. So I think that's interesting. I don't know the answer to this question, but has there been any alternate liquidator registration appointments under the new? So part of the new law was there a second tier of registrant, and I'm not sure if anyone's been sought registration.
Do you mean the simplified liquidation?
Well, you could be a different type of practitioner. You could be a registered liquidator. That's right. In the traditional sense, you could be registered to undertake this type of work. Michael, do you know if anyone has registered?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I did. Michael actually raised that with me on Tuesday, and in a perfect world, if I had, if I was Channel 9 and just not some YouTube blogger, I would have got my teams of researchers to check that one out. And Michael did flag that it would be a very interesting thing to know. But I don't know. Listen, I just want to acknowledge Richard Johnson's comment here. He agrees with everybody, and there is no real ability to test the roadworthiness of this. Richard's coming to us from WA, so thank you very much, Richard, for your comment there. You're more or less reinforcing the comments here that it's a bit chicken and the egg, isn't it? I mean, it's a matter of nobody wants to necessarily to make a wrong step. But yeah, I would have liked to have known. People were concerned about who it was that was going to become these alternative practitioners, whether or not they were going to be accountants or who they might be. Shabnam's raising again this issue here that it may well be that in some cases the pre-pack, which I think that does the small business restructuring actually facilitate the old pre-pack. I mean, that's what it was meant to do in the UK. That's what the new legislation did. It allowed practitioners to predetermine the result of an insolvency. I mean, it's something that goes on. Do you think that that's one of the virtues of this, Michael?
I know the reason for the inclusion, which is not that. It was because of the supposed tsunami. So there was a concern that there would just be so much work and few qualified people to do it. The other relates to regional appointments. And if you're dealing with remote locations with small business, it's not always easy to find a qualified practitioner, especially for a smaller matter. So the view was, if you could qualify the local accountant who may very well be able to do that, then that was the intent. But the reform was, put in the furnace at the time that the consensus was there would be thousands of potential insolvencies.
Yeah.
And now it's emerged in this most benign of worlds. So that was the rationale behind it, but the rationale hasn't played out in reality.
Okay, listen, guys, we're 46 minutes in. So I am going to ask you just very quickly for any final comments. My final comment is that I think there is a window there, and people should strongly think if restructuring's on the table, really start thinking about it now, because the environment I don't think is going to get any better for it. But what are your closing comments, Michael? And then I'll come to you, Kathy.
You've got it spot on. I'll leave it there.
Okay, and Kathy?
I wholeheartedly agree. Everyone should go forth and come up with a restructuring plan. You've got plenty of people on the line that can help you execute.
Listen, Jill Lawrence has just put in a little sort of a snuck one under the door there. A little left field. Any view on the ripple through effect of Greensill implosion? I'm not seeing it myself, Jill, for what it's worth, and we deal with a lot of contractors. Michael?
I've heard on the grapevine that it hasn't been as a significant job in Australia, at least, as was expected. So I don't think that there will be that effect from that. Like Whyalla, it could be catastrophic there if something were to happen, with GFG, but Greensill, not so much. Kathy?
Similar views. I think the ultimate third-party credit risk cutting through Greensill is probably okay. It's really whether there's broader implications off the back of GFG.
Yeah. I mean, look, one of the things that I've certainly noticed was that probably there would have been a lot more exposure a couple of years ago, but through political pressure and what have you, the thing had sort of wound back. I'm not an expert on that, but I'm going to wrap it up. So thank you very much, Michael Sloan from Ashurst and Kathy Sozou from McGrathNicol. I really appreciate you making the time today. Thank you to all the people who've participated with your online comments and questions, and we'll do it all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Nick.
Thank you.